Hi, I'm Richard, the founder of 10 Adventures, and this is the 10 Adventures podcast. Each week we talk to real people about real adventures as they explore this incredible planet we all live on. This week we're talking to Rowan Smith about training for your next adventure. We are all thinking about post-pandemic adventures, so now is the time to start thinking about training, and Rowan shares a wealth of great advice about training and nutrition. I'm joined by Karen, a colleague, world traveler, and doctor. Enjoy. I'm really excited today because we have a great guest, and it's actually really topical because I've been talking to lots of people who have lost their workout schedule, kind of what they normally do during the pandemic, and they're kind of lost right now. And I'm wondering, what's your workout schedule been, your training regimen during the pandemic?
I've kind of changed it over the course of the pandemic because, early in March, we just thought this was a short-term thing and we were locked down here. So I was just going out doing a lot of hikes, exploring hikes in my area I hadn't been to before because that was allowed then. And then as things have evolved and persisted, I've kind of started doing different things. Over the summer I was backpacking and I did a cycling trip. And then kind of now that it's cold and rainy and not as nice outside here where I am, unlike Australia, I kind of changed it up again. We always had a home gym, but I invested in a barbell, like a real barbell and with real plates. And I got out this spinner for my home bike so that on really wet and rainy days I could do that. And I don't know, so far it's been kind of fun actually. How about you?
I started well in the summer, and when autumn came, I ended up doing nothing for October through to basically Christmas. I was working a lot as well, and then kind of with the Christmas break, reset, and I've worked out every day since Boxing Day, so I'm actually back in my program. It's working really well. I moved everything to the start of the day because I just couldn't fit it in with 3 kids and pandemonium at home. I just, trying to do it at the end of the day wasn't working. So I'm lucky, but I know lots of people are really struggling with this right now of, how do you work out when the gyms are closed? If you go into the mountains, trails are really busy. Some of them are closed. So we're really excited today to have Rowan Smith. Rowan's the founder of Summit Strength. And what is really cool about Summit Strength is it specializes in training amateur trekkers, hikers, and mountaineers, so they can have successful and pain-free adventures. And I don't know about you, Karen, but I've had tons of adventures where someone's nursing a sore knee or a bad hip, where you can just tell they aren't prepared for what they've taken on. And so I'm just excited to hear from Rowan and learn the tips about how to be healthy and ready for a great adventure. So how's it going, Rowan?
Yeah, great. I'm very, very excited to be on board, and I'm looking forward to this chat because I love talking about this stuff, so bring it on.
So why don't you give us all just an overview about how you got into this, what's Summit Strength, what's your background in training amateur adventure athletes?
Well, Summit Strength, as you said before, it's an online personal training service which specializes in working with hikers, trekkers, and mountaineers. The way I fell into this, and it was a really, really lucky occurrence in the sense that through my whole life, I've really had 2 things I've been really, really interested in. On one side of things have been sort of sporting performance. So, when I was younger, I was into all types of sports. I had aspirations to be a really, really good sprinter, which unfortunately fell through. And when I sort of realized I couldn't do it professionally, as everyone says, if you can't do it, you teach it. So went to university, learned all about sport and exercise science. I was working as a personal trainer and sort of leading into, aspirations to work in sports performance. Now, on the other side of things, my other sort of passion that I absolutely loved was really just sort of adventure in any way, shape or form. So when I was younger, I grew up doing lots of bushwalking with my old man, joined scouts at an early age, did lots of things like that, loved all types of water sports. Once I got out of school, I was all around the world doing lots of traveling and just shooting around everywhere. And then essentially a few years ago, I got really, really lucky in the sense that my passion for adventure and my actual profession and career as a personal trainer managed to collide. And I started working at a job which was one of these simulated altitude gyms. And that was one of the first places that I was exposed to sort of hikers and trekkers and mountaineers in a professional sense. I'd done lots of hiking and trekking for myself, but I never really considered it as a professional thing. And then I sort of started training people, and I really came to the realization very quickly that what we were doing just wasn't really enough. There were so many people training for these amazing adventures. So they're going to things like Everest Base Camp and Kilimanjaro and all these cool places, but they were getting trained just like any other person, and they just weren't getting very well prepared. And there was all these extra issues you may not first consider, like things like knee pain and foot pain, and people trying to prepare for mountain adventures, and they didn't have mountains to train on and all of this stuff. And we weren't really helping them incredibly well with it. We were helping them a bit, and the information online wasn't really helping them. It was, there wasn't very much quality stuff. And I realized, look, there's an actual really great opportunity for me, myself, because I know what I'm doing in this sense. I know how to help people with this, and I feel like I could be doing more. And also, this is such an amazing group of people to work with, like hikers. They're the best. They're so much more fun than saying, all right, I want to lose 5 kilos, or I want to, get ripped for a bodybuilding show or something like that. So yeah, I got really lucky, and that fell into place. And then I was doing that for a little while, and I realized, look, where I'm working right now, it's not really aligned with what I want to do and sort of my values and where I want to take this. So that's when I stepped out for Summit Strength under my own name, where I really had the intention of creating a really, really comprehensive preparation service for hikers, trekkers and mountaineers. So whether it's someone who just wants to get a bit better for their first overnight hike, or reduce a bit of pain for their day hiking, to people doing some of the biggest adventures in the world. So like Kili, or going to the top of, some of the 8,000 meter peaks in Nepal or whatever. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and how I end up doing what I'm doing, which couldn't be happier, really.
Well, that sounds pretty exciting, Rowan. It sounds like it's fun. It sounds like you meet a lot of great people. So how do you feel like people preparing themselves properly for this, how does it help them when they decide to do these big adventures?
So that's a really, really good question, because a lot of people, when I say what I'm doing, if they're not a hiker or they're not into these things, they look at me a bit funny and say, hiking, it's just walking. Why do you need to get ready for this? But, my whole thing is there's 3 main things that I help people with, and that's to have a safe, an enjoyable, and a successful adventure. So the successful one's pretty self-explanatory. If you're stepping into something that's a little bit bigger and something that's a little bit more challenging, and you're simply just not ready, you might not finish it. Like, that's the worst case scenario. You might have to finish pull off early. You might be in the middle of nowhere, have to get a rescue. Like, that's obviously not a good thing. And that's the sort of more extreme areas. On the other side of things is the comfort, in the sense that if we step into hikes, and I know we've all done this as hikers, if we step into hikes which we're not particularly ready for, and we might be able to get through it, but we're struggling the whole way through. We're getting up and up the hills. We're huffing and puffing. Our legs are shaking. By the end of the day, we're like, I'm not even looking up around. I'm just looking at my feet. And I'm just not having a good time. So having that enjoyment on the trail, and I say trying to be in a position where we can enjoy every single step of the way, we can look around, take it in, enjoy the culture if we're in a different country or whatever, that to me is super, super important. And on the other side of things, the safe is so many people, as we said just before, so many people struggle with pain and injury, both in their preparations before a trip and also when they're actually on the trail. So time and time again, I hear from people who, they're preparing for a bit of a bigger hike, whether it's a massive one or not, and they do lots and lots of walking, and they pull up with plantar fasciitis, or they get knee pain, and all of a sudden they're concerned, they're stressing, they may not even be able to go on the hike. And then when you're on the trail, like, one of the biggest reasons people fall off the trail is just they might sprain their ankle, or they might twist their knee, or do something like that. And the right preparation, as much as we can never completely eliminate the odds of that happening, it can definitely reduce those odds and make you put you in a much better position. So really, the benefits of training are safe, enjoyable, and successful adventures in what I'm all about.
Sounds like a great idea. Really good. So give us an idea of what successful training involves for people, for hiking and trekking.
I think the first place that most people think, and generally this is what like 99% of the advice you'll see online around training for hiking, is essentially, if I'm going to get ready for a hike, I'm just going to go out and do lots and lots of hiking. And that's absolutely great. And that's one piece of the puzzle, but there's so many other things you can be doing to help yourself in this situation. Because if you see maybe a marathon runner or maybe a cyclist or something like that, sure, they do a lot of running, but they also do a lot of other things around it to help support their training as well. And I really do believe hikers should think like that. So there's really 4 areas of training and preparation, which I'm a big advocate for hikers. And that comes down to what strength training, what I call hiking specific conditioning, the hiking itself, as well as what's called recovery and mobility training. So the strength training is sort of doing things, whether you do it at home with your body weight, maybe you're moving a pack, maybe use some dumbbells at a gym or something. But that's sort of looking at two main outcomes on that side of things. That is the single best thing you can do to help prevent pain and injury if you're doing some smart strength training. There's absolutely no argument about it, and there is a lot of hesitation on this type of things, but it is 100% true, and it can really, really go a long way to help reduce the risk of pain and injury for many hikers. On the other side of things, a little bit of strength training can really make such a difference when you're going up and down hills, when you're carrying a pack on your back, when you have unstable terrain, and just reducing the chance of the legs just letting you down or the balance letting you down, because that comes in. Now, the hiking specific conditioning, like something may not make sense initially, but I'm a big believer in having a look at what sections of your hiking do you actually struggle with? What sections do you personally know gives you a little bit of trouble? So common examples of this might be going up hills, and some people will really get huffed and puffed going up hills. Some people really get shaky, burny legs going up hills. Some people will struggle carrying a pack on the back, and that's just not something they're happy with. Some people will struggle with actual hiking speed, and they might be with a group and they're just super self-conscious that they're always at the back and holding people up. But I'm a big believer in identifying those issues that you personally struggle with and choosing workouts which can specifically help with that type of thing. So it might involve doing some type of interval training on a bike. It might be doing some loaded pack walking or some stair sessions or some hill sessions or something like that. Now, the hiking training is pretty self-evident, but sort of, going out and hiking. But my belief is doing that in a way where you're sort of taking little steps up each time. So you put a little bit of structure around it. You're not just doing it in a way where you're just choosing random hikes or just jumping into random distances, because that is a big risk factor and a big mistake I see from many hikers when it comes to pain. So just having a little thought, getting the calendar out and say, this week I'm going to do a 4-hour hike, this week a 5-hour hike. That in itself, worth its weight in gold for hikers. And then the recovery and mobility work, and that's just looking at, obviously strength and training is important, but sometimes people might not have the flexibility or the mobility they need to, get through their hikes they may want to do. They may struggle with, stepping up onto bigger steps. They may struggle with their ankles when they're going around on unstable terrain or whatever it may be. And doing some specific stretching and specific mobility work can really, really go a long way into making that much more comfortable and also much safer for many hikers. So in my eyes, as a perfect preparation program, it'll cover each of those areas: the strength training, the specific conditioning sessions, the hiking programming, and the recovery and mobility work. And I could talk about that for hours and hours and hours, but that's literally what I do day to day. But that as a general overview, that's what I think is the perfect preparation program, regardless of what adventure you're doing.
In 2021 is I've traded volume for frequency. And so I used to try and think, how can I fit in a 90-minute or 2-hour training, 2 or 3 times a week. And this year I've said, how can I fit in 20 to 45 minutes every day? And I've seen some, really, really big improvements. I do a lot of cycle training where you can measure kind of your watt output. And, for me, that was a big aha moment because, doing something every day, it's a lot easier to fit in. And if you miss one day, which I haven't yet, but it's not as impactful as missing one day if you're doing a 2-hour training. But, what's your approach to volume?
When it comes to that side of things, there's benefits to both ways of going about it. Some people will argue, doing those longer sessions, that you do need that sort of volume in one hit to really prepare yourself for those longer stretches on the trail. Some people will notice actually shorter sessions where I can work a bit harder. They don't put as much stress onto my life. They're much more beneficial for me. One of my big philosophies as a coach, and I think everyone should adopt this in their own training, is finding an approach that fits around your life as opposed to you having to fit your life around the training. So if you're retired, you don't have any issues, and you can fit in 2-3 hour sessions a few times a week, absolutely, why not? If if you've got a family, if you've got a job, if you've got whatever, and looking at 20-minute sessions, that might be a better approach for you. For most of my clients, what I generally recommend is trying to find a middle ground between that. And I generally say, look, we want to try and find once a week where we can do something longer, whether it's a hike, whether it's a run, whether it's a cycle, at the very least once every 2 weeks, because we do need some exposure to that. But beyond that, generally everything else we do is either 60 minutes, 45 minutes, or even 20, 30 minutes, because I know we all have lives and I know it's hard to fit in. And if you put a little bit of structure around your training, you can get so much done in 20 minutes as opposed to, just faffing around for 2 hours really. So that's my opinion on there. There's so many directions you can go, but I find the middle ground tends to be the best way.
Now, I must say that before this interview, I looked at a lot of the stuff that you and Summit Strength have online. I listened to your podcasts. I looked at your Instagram. I looked at your Facebook. So I'm familiar with just from that a lot of what you were talking about. But the one thing that I thought would be good would be for you to talk a bit about loaded pack training, because I'm not sure everyone would know what you were referring to by that.
Absolutely. And this is literally the most simple workout a hiker can do, but it's so relevant. It's so beneficial, and particularly with so many people who are struggling with restrictions this year, having to be, whether locked down at home or whether, around your local neighborhood or whatever, it's been so valuable over these last 12 months. And loaded pack walking, when I say it literally involves putting on your backpack, putting a little bit of weight in it and walking around your neighborhood. Now, that's the core essence of it. Obviously, you can get a little bit more in depth with that. And a way that I like to generally work with my clients around that is initially we'll say, okay, what's a sort of pack weight which you are very, very much comfortable with? So some people might say 4 kilos, 7 kilos or pounds or whatever you want to work. We start with that and we say, look, you're going to go do 30 minutes, 45 minutes, just walking around the neighborhood. That's literally all you're going to do. The next week, we're going to do an extra kilo. The next week, we're going to do an extra kilo, and do that for maybe 4 or 5 weeks. And then we'll make the decision. We're like, okay, do we want to keep on increasing pack weight, or do we want to make this a little bit trickier? And then a couple of ways we can mix that up is we can start doing with a loaded pack. You can start doing, periods of faster walking where you're getting a little bit huffed and puffed, and periods of normal walking. And we do that for 3 or 4 weeks and then change it up again. And then we may look at, doing stair sessions and having a loaded pack on your back and going up and down a set of stairs or a hill. And it's literally the simplest workout you can think of. But if you put a little bit of thought behind it, as opposed to just throwing a pack on and just going out for a walk, it can be an incredible tool for pretty much any hiker in any situation. And even people who are just doing day hikes with just a day pack on their back, it's one of those things that even if you are loading up a little bit more in these sessions, if you're just doing 30 minutes, 45 minutes walking with a pack which is heavier than you're doing on the trail, it's still going to be beneficial in so many different ways. So for my clients, whether it's from a first-time hiker to a lifelong mountaineer, almost everyone will have something similar to that in their program at one stage or another, because I love it. It's simple and it's very, very effective.
Now, one thing, actually, I didn't know you were going to ask that, Karen. I can interject something. It's hard to find, during the pandemic, hard to find free weights. They're expensive. And so actually, I used to do this all the time when I lived in London, England. I'd walk to work and I was training for the GR10 in the Pyrenees. And, you can't buy weights in London. So I'd get these big tins of beans or tomatoes. And so by the end of it, I'd get to work and open my bag, and I just had can after can after can. My colleagues thought I was crazy, but it's a really low cost way to get weight, because a big tin of beans or of tomatoes is 3/4 of a kilo, and so it's a great way to find the weight. Or you can use water, but beans and tomatoes might be more fun to eat at the end. I don't know.
I think, Rowan, you actually recommend water for your weights for loaded pack carries. Am I correct?
So my general recommendation on that is to either use bottles of water or a dry bag full of water, purely for the fact that if you get halfway through and you're like, I work with a lot of people who do struggle with foot, knee, back pain. And if you get halfway through and you're like, I've bitten off more than I can chew, or my ankle's getting sore, you just pour water out and continue, and you're all happy days. But then saying that, the beans are great. I heard bags of rice. I've heard cat food. The best one was one of my clients, and she was training during lockdown over in Sydney and in the middle of COVID. And she was doing her loaded pack walk where she would walk to the bottle shop every week to buy her alcohol for the week. And as the stress of COVID was getting more and more and more, every single week she was buying more and more and more. And so the kilos were going up in that. And I was like, perfect. That fits in your life. We got the progression there. Why not?
That's a good one. Actually, I was on the trail one time and saw an older man training, and he had bags of soil in his backpack for his training, because he was training for a big pack way in the north of Canada. So that's funny. So you kind of outlined the types of training you get people to do. So part of it would be the strength training. Part of it is the hiker-specific conditioning, of which loaded pack walking is part of it. And then did you separate just general, cardiovascular training from hiker-specific training?
You can get as technical as you want there. Generally, not they're pretty much the same thing, but the way that I like to present it is the specific stuff is when we're doing a session and we have a really, really particular outcome we're aiming for, In our general cardio training, it might be, hey, I'm going for a run, hey, I'm doing a gym class, something like that. And that's generally going to get us fitter. But I'm a big believer in sort of teaching people, saying, I'm doing this workout for this particular reason. So if I do these things, not only am I going to get fitter, but I'm going to get fitter in this particular way. I'm developing this particular part of my energy system, and it's going to help me in this particular way on the trail. So I try to sort of bring my clients from doing the general stuff and sort of shifting most of the things into the specific conditioning, just so, that's what I think is really beneficial long term. But, it's just a technicality. It's the same thing as, going out and doing a step class, or same thing as going for a run. And whatever really works for you is just a different terminology.
So in general, how do you structure a client's, say their programming? How many days are they strength training? How many days are they doing more conditioning work? Changes
from client to client. And as I said before, one of my big philosophies as a coach is fitting the training around someone's life as opposed to fitting their life around the training. So some people I'm working with, they're literally doing maybe 3 sessions of 15 minutes a week, which is very, very small, but they've got crazy lives right now. Some people have got nothing going on. They're doing 2 hours a day and they're loving it. As a general, a really, really general thing, if someone was saying, I want to do 4 sessions a week or 5 sessions a week, it might look at doing 2 strength sessions at home for 45 minutes or so, which have a mixture of strength training, have a mixture of mobility training and core training, balance training, and that's all worked into one. Maybe 1 session of that hiking specific conditioning, so maybe 1 session of stairs or loaded pack walking or intervals on the bike, and the one thing that's a little bit longer, so a walk, a longer cycle, a hike. For the guys in winter, some of them are doing cross-country skiing or snowshoeing at this stage. And then maybe a couple of smaller stretch sessions or recovery sessions in between. And that's sort of, as a massive generalization, that's sort of what it looks like for a few people that I'm working with at the moment.
Sounds reasonable. I was wondering what kind of errors people who are training for a big adventure typically make if they don't have input from you. Or what are the things you hear, or the things that you saw at your previous job, that where people weren't getting ready probably in the right way?
Biggest mistakes I see is, and you don't need anyone's input from this, it's super, super straightforward, is number one, with your hiking. Biggest mistake, as I said before, is just doing random hikes here and there. It makes, we're hikers, we like to be spontaneous, but if you're training for a particular trip, putting a tiny bit of structure around it is so beneficial for your fitness and also your actual chances of injuries. So biggest mistake there is not doing any planning. If you're trying to do that by yourself, literally all I ask you to do is get out your calendar, list out every single day that you think you're going to hike over the next 2-3 months, whatever it may be. You want to choose your longest hike you're going to do 2 weeks before your particular trip you're going to go on. So for example, if you're going to, I've got a lot of people training for Kilimanjaro, well, not this year, but other previous times, and we'll say 2 weeks before you go, you're going to do your longest hike there, and which may be 8, 9, 10 hours, whatever it may be. And then you literally work backwards on the calendar every single date, and you just sort of drop the distance a little bit, all the way down to 1. Now, it's not set in stone, it's not perfect, but that one simple thing can just skyrocket results for any hike, and it doesn't take any thought. Mistake number 2 that I see is people just walking for their training. So in the sense of, we've talked about strength training, hiking specific conditioning. What I often see is they'll get these programs online, which will be, trek preparation programs or hiking preparation programs, and it'll say, look, you have to do 3 or 4 hikes a week. Every single week it's going to get more and more and more. And you can do that for 4 or 5 weeks, that's fine, but eventually the body begins to break down on those things, and that's when people come to see me, when they get into trouble, which might be good for my business, but it's not good as a whole. So if you are looking at your training and it's literally only walking and that's all you're doing, I would fully encourage you to do something else. So it might be just hopping on the bike, it might be hopping in the pool doing a swim, it might be doing some strength training, but one simple change there, shifting 1 or 2 sessions to something else, absolutely amazing. And then number 3, the other biggest mistake I see is people just doing every single week and try to get fitter and fitter and fitter, but never giving themselves a rest. So they'll say, I've got 12 weeks to a hike, I'm going to hike every single week up until then, or I'm going to do 5 days a week for the next 12 weeks. And, our body, we need rest and recovery. It's just necessary. So what I recommend to people is try, if you're planning on hiking or training hard every single week, every 4th week, give yourself a bit of a rest. have a really casual walk instead of a hike, go for a swim instead of a hike, drop a couple of sessions in that 4th week. And train hard for 3 weeks, have a rest every 4th week. And again, you don't need to, be a professional. You don't need a coach helping you there, but you can just work that out for yourself. And that in itself makes such a difference over the long term. 3 really, really simple things I see again and again and again, but with a little bit of thought behind that, it makes a massive difference. So, yeah.
Sounds good. How about when you talk about strength training, do you get a lot of people that come to you that aren't doing it? I kind of would think that would be common, but I'm not sure.
When people first start talking to me, probably 50% of people are doing no strength training at all. Of the 50% who are doing it, probably 30% are literally only doing either squats or lunges, or only doing maybe banded clams and some other banded exercise they've had from a physio. And while that is definitely better than nothing, it's only a very, very small percentage of what a real strength program can actually do for a hiker. And if you can get a real structure to it, if you can get something built out for you, if you can get taught how to do a few different moves, it's greater than the sum of its parts. And, it's just absolutely night and day what a difference it can make. So there's a lot of hikers not doing type of strength training, but there's a lot of people who are doing, the very small potential that they could actually be doing when it comes to getting better. And when I say strength training, a lot of people get scared, think, oh, that's heavy weights in the gym or whatever it may be, but it doesn't have to be like that. It can literally be doing stuff with your pack at home. It can be doing body weight exercises. There's 1,000,001 ways you can go about strength training to get stronger. It doesn't just have to be that scary stuff in the gym, which I know a lot of hikers prefer not to be in the gym. I know a lot of hikers don't have a history of that, and they're not absolutely in love with lifting a barbell or anything like that. So when I'm talking about strength training, it's literally just straining the muscles in a particular type of way, as opposed to saying, I'm stuck in a gym environment, I have to do these things that I first imagine.
So for the hikers right now who aren't doing any strength training, and with COVID makes it hard to go into the gym, give us some ideas of things they could be doing at home that would be in the strength training area that they could do with what they have in their house.
3 exercises that I firmly believe every single hiker, any shape or form, should be doing. And you can look these up on YouTube. It's easy enough. There's 1,000,001 videos. Doesn't require any equipment. Number 1 is a step down, in which you stand on a step and you slowly lower 1 foot down to the floor and up. Look it up on YouTube. There's a million videos, but that's one of the most specific things a hiker can do for their hiking, and it's incredible for knee stability, ankle stability, hip stability, improving your descents. Like, it's amazing. All my clients do it. You don't need any equipment, and that's number 1. Number 2, every single hiker should be doing is something called a single leg deadlift, which is really, really fantastic about developing the hamstrings, the glutes, developing balance, ankle stability. Again, absolutely amazing for hikers in so many different situations. Doesn't require any equipment. You can check that out online. And then number 3 is doing something called a glute bridge, which is a little bit simpler, and it's really targeting the glutes, which often gets neglected for many, many hikers. Doesn't require any equipment, and it's a really, really simple thing to throw in there. Now, for people who've done a bit of training, they might be like, oh, those exercises, they're a bit easy. Like, I want to make that a bit harder. And the simplest thing, if you don't have access to a gym, you can just get a pack, put a bit of weight on it, and use that as weight. So for the step down, you can have it on your back. For the single leg deadlifts, you can hold in your hands. For the glute bridge, you can have it across your hips. And that's how we do it with my clients. And there's other variations you can do, but that's the simplest place for any hiker to start. If you literally do those 3 exercises, and you do them twice a week for 4 weeks or something, and slowly put a bit of weight on, I would not be surprised if you notice a difference on the trail, like just from that. So I think that's a really good place for many hikers to start. So for the upper body, you can do things like 2 exercises again with the pack, which I often get people to do. A floor press, which is literally lying on your back and pushing like a bench press or dumbbell press, but with your pack. Really simple exercise. A lot of people, a lot of hikers I know struggle with shoulder issues, very, very shoulder safe, and it's really easy to do. For the back, doing the same thing, but a row in motion. So I tend to get people to support themselves on a bench, do something called a 1-arm row, but with the pack. And then you can do things like, push-ups. You can do things like, rows with a band or something like that. But those 2 exercises, the floor press and the 1-arm row with a pack, most of my clients will do them at one stage or another. And that'll tend to, if you put enough weight on it, it'll give you enough stimulus, and you can just add water bottles, add cans of beans or whatever it may be, as you get stronger, and to make it easy. So, people who've trained a little while might say, oh, this looks super easy, but you just adjust the difficulty to what's appropriate for you.
Rowan, I have a question. So you've coached, so many different people. Are there any success stories where you think back of, a great transformation, or, somebody where you just, you really, really were amazed at the success, or you really helped somebody? I'd love to hear kind of, going from somebody who's really going to struggle to someone who had a great success on a really tough trek or a hike or a trip.
One of my favorite stories actually is a girl called Jen that I was training. She was over in the States, I'm over in Australia, and she was leading up into Mount Kilimanjaro, first bigger trek she'd done in a while. What was unique about her is most of the people that come to see me are, usually 40, 50, 60, something like that. Purely because the younger hikers, they're hard to convince they need to train. But Jen came to see me. She was sort of late 20s, but she had some pretty bad knee pain. And she was aware that, like, when she was on some hikes in the past, she'd been on the hikes and she was in literal tears going down hills because the knee pain is getting that bad. And she'd booked herself onto Kilimanjaro with her partner, and it was something that they'd aspired to do for a long, long time. And they booked on. They're like, look, this is happening. But she was really concerned that, she might be able to get up, but the knee on the way down, when you're doing a 5, 6, 7, 8 hours on the way down, whatever trip you're doing, that was going to be excruciating for her. And she was worried. She wasn't going to be able to do it. So she came on board. We talked, we chat. She came on board the training. We trained together for about 12, 16 weeks leading in. And initially she was still concerned, and we were going through the strength work, we were going through the cardio. She was getting fitter, but her knees were still troubling her. And she was, feeding back to me. She's like, I'm worried, I'm scared. I don't know if I'm going to make it. I'm like, I'm doing all this work. It's not changing. And I was like, look, just trust it. It takes a while to kick into action. Bear with it. A few weeks before the trip, she had a slip somewhere or something happened. And I think she threw out her back. She had a slip and threw out her back. And she was like, oh my gosh, now I won't be able to do the trip. She was freaking out. She was scared. And again, we were just chatting back. We're like, look, you got plenty of time, chill out, relax, take it easy. And we kept on going through the process. And then she flew out, she went on the trip, and she ended up getting through the Kilimanjaro trip, something she'd been dreaming with forever. Absolutely no pain in the knees. She had a great time. She got some amazing photos on the summit. She got the flu on the last day before summit day, so she had a bit of a nightmare there. But that's, can't really control that. It wasn't altitude sickness, it was just the flu, so that was a nightmare. But the fact was, the knees, which was such a struggle for her and was on her mind for so long, it didn't bother her. And when she got back, not only did she say, look, this trip that I've been dreaming about for ages, me and my partner did it, but now I have the confidence that all these other things I've been dreaming of, I can go and do. I know what I need to do to support my knees. I'm confident. And she was only late 20s, and she was like, I got another 30, 40 years of hiking ahead of me. I was worried that my hiking days were over, or my multi-day hiking days were over. And to see that shift from I'm kind of defeated and I don't think this is something I can do anymore to I've conquered a dream and now there's so many more dreams unlocked for me, that was amazing for me. And yeah, that was a really significant story.
Yeah, that's incredible. And you just realize, there's so many issues that can develop, and just putting in the time beforehand. I had a similar issue with my back, and I still think back to my coach, and it was 3 months of training, and that changed my life. And it's incredible that, you're changing lives by training and letting people achieve their goals. I had one question. Do you have any specific training you do to help people deal with altitude? Kili's famous for people struggling with the altitude. Is there anything you can do training wise to help them, or is that just you've got to acclimatize and hope for the best?
Yeah, so it's a very, very interesting subject because altitude sickness, it's still, as much as it's been around for forever, people experience it forever, it's still not very well understood. And 100% the biggest risk factor in regards to that is always going to be your time on the mountain. And you just see the difference in success rates between the 5-day trips to the 9-day trips. That is 100% always going to be the most significant risk factor that you can control. But beyond that, a lot of people like to say that training doesn't affect your risk of altitude sickness. And there's also people who go the other way and they like to say that training actually puts you at a higher risk of altitude sickness. And they say that if you're fitter, you'll have more risk of altitude sickness because there's some numbers or there's some common assumption that people who are fitter tend to go a bit faster on the mountain and they have, more rates of getting altitude sickness. Not because they're fit, because they're just going quicker and they're not, listening to their limits. So there is this argument So there is definitely some argument around that, but that is the reason they're getting sickness is because they're just going too quick. That's literally it. When it comes down to fitness, absolutely, the more fit you can be, the better, because one risk factor of altitude sickness is exhaustion. And if you can get your state, while it may not directly affect your acclimatization levels, there's some debate, it may or may not, but there's no argument in the fact that the further you can get yourself away from exhaustion at the end of the day or throughout, and the more reserves you can have, the less likely you are going to have, a risk of altitude sickness. Again, there's a lot of other factors that go into that, but that is one thing you can control. So in regards to training, what you want to be looking at in this, and one big mistake I didn't mention before, but one big mistake that I see promoted online a lot about this is a lot of people advocate for the traditional HIIT training for this particular thing, because they say, I'm up at high altitude, I get huffed and puffed, I get out of breath. So if I'm at home and I go super, super quick for 40 seconds and get super, super out of breath and then recover and then do it again and do it again and do it again, that's going to prepare my body for altitude because it feels similar. But if you're getting a little bit deeper, that's not really the best way of going about it. The HIIT training can have its place, but it's not going to be replicating that altitude training. Essentially, two things you want to be looking at is, number one, the more time you can spend in lower intensity, long duration cardio. So that's your hiking, that's your cycling, that's your running, that's your swimming, or whatever you prefer. The more time you can spend in that, you develop a lot of different adaptations in the body, which are very beneficial for particularly hiking fitness. So your body can have more what's called aerobic capacity, meaning you can go harder for longer, meaning your body can have more reserves. It's not fun, it's not flashy, and it's really, really simple, but that's the best thing you can do. Now, on top of that is one thing that I love to do with my clients, and this is a very specific workout, so if you're listening, get your pen and paper handy, because I'm going to give you some numbers. But this is something that I get most of my clients to do that's called aerobic power intervals, and there's some science behind this. There's not direct science at altitude, but it makes sense logically, and it has worked for my clients. And essentially what you want to do, get yourself on like a stationary cycle, get yourself on an elliptical, get yourself on some type of piece of equipment where you don't have to worry about anything, but you can go really, really quick for a period of time and not have to worry. And then what you want to do is you want to go really, really, really quick for 3 minutes. 3 minutes quick. You don't have to absolutely kill yourself, but you want to be pretty huffed and puffed by the end. Then you want to have 90 seconds rest, and you want to repeat that anywhere from 5 to 10 times. And then every single time you do it, you just want to add an extra repeat onto it each week. So one week you do 5, next week you do 6, next week you do 7, yada, yada, yada. And the theory behind this particular type of intervals, as I said, there's a little bit of science behind it. And the idea behind this time frame is when you're working at this time, you're supposed to be targeting the very, very topmost level of your aerobic energy system, which is essentially how your body produces oxygen, produces energy while using oxygen as a fuel source. And if we can increase this ability of the body to produce energy using oxygen as a fuel source at higher intensities, in theory, that's going to transfer into high altitude, because then you can work at higher intensities and still use oxygen and yada, yada, yada. And in practice, again, there's no direct studies linking this, so I couldn't back that up. But directly seeing this with clients, it has made a significant difference. And this is the exact same thing you can do is if you do just naturally get huffed and puffed on hills, and you're not at altitude, there's the exact same protocol I use for that, because it makes a significant difference there. So get into the weeds a little bit, but I think that's pretty valuable because it's a really simple thing anyone can do. It doesn't take much thought, but it's very, very effective. So they're the two things you probably look at a high altitude preparation, beyond all the other stuff we were talking about before.
So that's three minutes on, 90 seconds off. Keep repeating it over and over again. It should help you get better.
That's it.
I'm going to try it. How about nutrition on the trails? What are the mistakes you see people making, and what are some general principles?
Yeah, so nutrition on the trail is again an interesting subject, and a lot of people. The issue with nutrition, from my perspective as a coach, is people, as opposed to with training, you might take a sort of logical approach. You might take you might try different things. People are almost dogmatic about the nutrition. So, they'll find something and they'll get very, 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 very emotional about it, which, it might be good, but it can be a bit tricky. So anyone who's listening, bear with me. But basically, a couple of things I recommend to all my clients is, number one, common mistake I see from hikers is they simply just don't eat enough on the trail. A lot of people are really, really concerned about their pack weight and really, really concerned about bringing food, and they're trying to limit everything. But the pure fact is if you are not fueling sufficiently or optimally, you might be able to get through things. So there's no argument a lot of people, hikers, can get through eating absolutely nothing at all. But you might not be performing to the best of your abilities, meaning things might feel harder, meaning you might get a bit more tired than you really need to be. And my big belief is if you bring a little bit more food than you're used to, and if you're fueling optimally, then it doesn't matter if you're carrying an extra kilo on your back, because you're going to be feeling better anyway. So that's my argument. what I recommend for my clients is generally setting themselves the task of trying to eat something small every single hour they're on the trail. Or if you can't do that, at the very least, just trying to eat something before you get hungry. Because essentially what happens is, we usually have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We might have, some snakes or, a little snack here and there, but we usually use hunger as a cue for, when we're going to eat. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that day to day. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, for most people. But if you can preempt that when you're actually exercising, when you're hiking, I should say, and if you can just get a little bit of food into you before that happens, you can make sure your fuel levels are topped up in quotation marks and at the peak. And that way you can just reduce the effects of fatigue and increase your comfort and increase your enjoyment and increase your alertness and your concentration. So it's a really, really simple technique, and it could literally be one little lolly once an hour or a sip of sports drink. It doesn't have to be much, but that's a really simple thing. You don't have to have any nutrition knowledge around that. It doesn't matter what type of eating approach you do. Anyone can really do that, and that's a really simple thing. So of all the things I could say on nutrition, I think that's probably the most significant tip I could give any hiker. And obviously there's going to be outlying situations where that's not possible if you're doing like a massive mountain and your food's frozen or something like that. But, for the typical hiker, I would say that's a good thing to aim for.
Sounds like good advice. I noticed with myself that when I'm hiking, my appetite actually goes down. And I think a lot of people describe that when they're hiking initially early on if they're doing a through hike. And also altitude. Altitude really affects, hunger as well. So in those situations where you're not hungry, what I'm hearing from you is like still try and get something in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does get trickier when you're not hungry. And altitude is a different story. Like altitude, yes, undereating is a major issue up there. And this is something you really need to stay on top on. But in that situation, if you are aware, look, I don't actually get super hungry on the trail, but I actually also want to try and get some extra fuel in. Usually the solution to this is doing some type of liquid with some type of fuel inside it. So that might look like a sports drink, like a Gatorade or an electrolyte powder with carbohydrates or something like that. And you can literally just sip that as you go along. It's very easy to digest. You can have it when you're not hungry, or you might just have to think about, hey, what snacks do I really enjoy? And some people like sweet, some people like savory, some people like sour, or whatever it may be, and just having them easily accessible. So even if you're not absolutely starving, you can sort of cue yourself. You're like, all right, I'm going to have something to eat, and then okay, this is actually something I enjoy, so it's not going to be a chore. And then when you're on the longer things like the through hikes or the big altitude adventures, I always recommend people have a selection of different tastes of snacks. So instead of bringing 5 bags of Snickers or whatever, making sure you got sweet, making sure you got savory, making sure you got sour, making sure you got spicy. So no matter what mood you're in, you can have that potential to get a little snack in and get a little fuel in. It does get tricky, but there's a few things you can do to help out there.
So, Ron, I have a question. So, a lot of people are used to training with a coach in a physical gym. The world has changed. You've mentioned you're training, clients across the world. Can you maybe explain how do you work with people where, you're not in even the same country or the same continent?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing over the last 5 years or so. Online training has become much more accessible, obviously with technology and everything. And the last year it's been in everyone's faces because of gym closures. There's a few different ways people go about it, but how I personally run things is for my training side of things, I have my own sort of training app in which I sort of load people's workouts. So depending on what we come up with for each person's individual situation, I'll load in particular workouts into this app and I'll say, these are your strength workouts, these are your cardio workouts, yada, yada, yada. And then someone will open up that app. They'll say, okay, I want to do a strength workout. And it'll literally go through every single exercise you need to do. There'll be a tutorial video which says, this is how you do it. This is what you look out for. This is the muscles you're working. Have a very big written description. And you literally just click on, it says, bang, 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 go through everything. Same to do cardio exercises. And it's very, very, very easy to do, as opposed to, the old pen and paper where you're looking at exercise, or you might have a handwritten drawing from a physio from 6 months ago and you're like, oh, what is this? At least it's all there. So that's very, very straightforward. But obviously programming by itself, most people, it is important, but it's not going to help a lot of people. So then we have a whole bunch of extra support. So the way I go about it is I have a big education series, which gets delivered via email. I have a community on Facebook in which we all get together. We share wins. We have accountability posts. We talk through issues together. We have live Zoom calls in which we hop on and we just chat through what's been working, what hasn't been working, go into subjects in a little bit more detail. And I really find the old school approach for a lot of personal training in the one-to-one sense was, unless you got a really, really, really good personal trainer, most of the time as you go in, you spend an hour with the trainer, they might give you a couple of exercises to work with, and that's it. And you'll see them next week for an hour and see you next week for an hour, and you pay for that time. But with the online model, the beauty of it is you just get so much added support and so much added value and so much added accountability. And honestly, for me, like, this may sound counterintuitive, but I personally found that with the online model, I get better results more consistently with my hikers than I used to get with one-to-one training. Not because the one-to-one training was bad in by any sense, but when people get this whole package and they value everything, 5 workouts a week as equal, as opposed to saying, I do one workout that's important and the other ones I might do. When people get this whole package, they just get so much better results. So personally, I love the online model, and I'm probably not going to go back to in-person training when gyms get back to normal, because I love making an impact, and I love working with clients all around the world. So yeah, that's how I go about it. But there are a few different ways different trainers play it all out.
Well, Rowan, this has been incredible. There's been so much great information you've shared, giving lots of really great tips. If people want to contact you, check you out, how can they find you?
Yeah, so there's if anyone was interested in this subject and just learning a little bit more about training for hiking or anything we talked about, there's three main areas which you'll probably get the most value out of. Essentially, number one, if you're into podcasts, you listen to this podcast, I have a podcast entirely dedicated to training for hiking, for altitude and nutrition. It's called the Training for Trekking podcast. 150 episodes plus on that. So any subject you want to learn about, it's going to be on there. That's free, get involved in that. Another free resource that is very super useful is I have a free Facebook group in which I sort of put up a little bit more detailed information around training for hiking. I answer people's questions. I sort of, we just celebrate each other inside there. And that's called the Training for Hiking and Trekking Facebook group. You can plug that into Facebook and it's free. You can get involved and join the community. And if you were interested in learning a little bit more about the business or learning a little bit more about the actual training itself and potentially learn about the programs and how I go about things, you can find my website at summitstrength.com.au. Don't forget the AU because I'm over in Australia. And that's where you can find, the success stories and information about the programs. I'm on Facebook and Instagram at summitstrength.au, but they're the main three areas I'd recommend if you want to learn a little bit more.
Thanks, Rowan. This has been a really great interview and kind of inspired me. I'm only doing cardio now. I'm just trying to build my base. I'm like, I got to start doing some strength. And so you've inspired me already. So that's impressive.
You have to start doing pack walks, loaded pack walks too.
I got tons of beans downstairs, so I'm ready. All right. Thanks, Rowan.
Been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on board.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the 10 Adventures podcast. If you liked it, why not give us a review? Better yet, subscribe and get inspired again and again. Also, if you want to find your own adventures, why not check out 10adventures.com, where you can use our free resources to plan your own trip or book a tour in over 60 countries and make your own epic memories on your next adventure.